I love that, Dave. I'm putting this on a sticky right now.
That's great. Well, and that's why you had us put the money in the jars, isn't it? That's just how he lives now. In this episode, you'll get to know Stephen A. Hart, the passionate brand strategist. And you'll hear the story of how he went from being an entrepreneurial-minded young man in Jamaica to being a leader in personal brand strategy. I'm Dave Crenshaw, and this is my Success Project. Welcome back, friends, to the Dave Crenshaw Success Project. This is a show where I'm teaching my children how to be successful through the life stories of others, and you get to come along for the ride. In case it's your first time here, I'm a best-selling author. I speak around the world to Fortune 500 companies, and I've taught millions of people how to be successful through my online courses. So with this show, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to create something lasting that would help my family succeed, and I thought you'd also enjoy learning along with them. I speak with some of the most successful people I've met in my life's journey. These are people who have achieved balanced, multifaceted success. And I'm looking for universal principles of success that you can apply in your life and career right now, no matter where you are, who you are, or what you do. And that's what this Success Project is all about. As you listen to today's episode, look for something you can do, an action you can take this week. And if you do that, you'll make my guest a part of your life forever. And my guest is certainly someone you want to make a part of your life. Stephen A. Hart is the founder of Isles Media and the host of the top-rated I Am Black Success podcast. He's featured over 250 successful Black entrepreneurs and leaders on his podcast and live show broadcasts, reaching his Blazer Nation community in over 150 countries. Stephen is a sought-after content creator, podcast producer, marketer, leader, speaker, and brand strategist. He's been featured in LinkedIn, Apple Podcast, Forbes, Black Enterprise, and Podcast Movement. Stephen, I'm so excited to have you here today.
Dave, thank you so much for having me.
And where are you located today?
I am in Clarksburg, Maryland, about 45 minutes north and west of DC.
Oh, wonderful. And you have a family. What's your family look like?
Yes, I am the proud husband to Kristen. We celebrate 15 years of marriage this coming June.
Oh, congrats.
And together, yeah, thank you. Together, we're blessed to have two amazing crumb snatchers, a daughter who turns a teenager in about 6 weeks, and our son who's 8.
And I've not heard the term crumb snatchers before. I know you're Jamaican. Is that a Jamaican term? Or is that just yours?
No, it isn't. Yeah, it's just mine.
Okay. All right. I like it. Crumb snatchers.
It was my way of talking about the kids without calling them by name in the podcast over the 7 years that I've been podcasting. And it's been fun to hear, people in my community will check in on social and say, how are the crumb snatchers?
Oh, that's lovely. That's wonderful. Okay, so we're going to get to know your story. And I always like to start at the beginning, which from my perspective is where you were first forming ideas about what your career would be. So when you were, in your teens, what did you think you wanted to be when you grew up?
Yeah. It's a good question, Dave. So I grew up in Kingston, Jamaica.
Okay.
I'm a kid born in the 70s, so grew up in Kingston in the 80s, early 90s before moving to the US. And I'm the product of divorced parents. So, grew up with a single mom with a dad who still had a very active presence. And my dad is somebody who grew up in a very rural area. Both my parents grew up in a rural area of Jamaica. Very large family. And my dad didn't have a high school education, but found himself in hotel management school, became a chef, became an entrepreneur, spent near 40 years running a catering business in Kingston. And so when you ask me to bring myself back to my teen years, I often think of the grit of my dad running an enterprise. And I can think back to 14, 15, beginning, not realizing it then, but I was trying to write a business plan for a restaurant that I would someday open in South Florida. Never quite happened that way.
And that was, yeah. Well, and was that something that your father was helping you with, was writing that business plan, or were you going out and
Not
figuring
really.
out on your own how to do that?
No, I think back to E-Myth. My dad, bless his heart, he was a technician. He was an amazing creative mind. Didn't really do well at the management aspect of his business and being able to scale it in the way that he would have liked. And so I think in my head, I'd always thought of, well, how could I become the strength in his area of weakness and that entrepreneur that would be able to scale his talents?
That's a lot of foresight for a teenager to have, to say, how can I help my father? And here's a weak area. I want to become strong in that. By the way, you mentioned, for those who are unfamiliar, you mentioned the E-Myth. There's a book called The E-Myth Revisited by Michael E. Gerber. This is the second time that's come up in one of my interviews. I have a little bit of background with that as well. So first of all, I want to say, I've had the privilege of speaking lots of places around the world. I would say Kingston is one of my top favorite places. Went out there, spoke to the YPO, Young Presidents Organization. They took me to the Bob Marley home.
Museum.
Yeah, and then they took me to Port Royal. Am I saying that right? Port Royal. And we had a lovely fish dinner with pressed cane juice. It all comes back to food for me, Stephen. But what a wonderful place. And so
Same with me.
Okay, great. And how long? So you grew up there in your teen years. For how many years were you there? When did you leave?
Yeah. So I graduated high school. So my parents had separated. My dad spent several years from I was 7 till I was probably about 12 or 13 living in South Florida. And so I'd spend all my vacations in Florida with my dad, but was attending school in Jamaica. And so the moment I graduated high school, and in Jamaica, you finish high school at 16. So I'm not, some super smart kid that just finished high school early.
Right.
But I graduated high school, and the very next day in 1993, I was on a flight going to Miami for a summer break. I never came back. So this summer, July, will mark 30 years that I've lived in the States.
So for those who have not lived there, what is something unique about living in Jamaica that maybe shaped who you are now? Something that's very different than perhaps what someone would experience in the United States, but that it's a powerful thing that's influenced who you are today.
I think back to the body of circumstances that, I kind of was raised again, entering high school. We don't have middle school in Jamaica like you do here in the States. So I entered high school at 11 years old, and, our high school was 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th. Graduated end of 11th. And so I went to an all-boy Jesuit high school in the heart of Kingston, right? And at 11, I was jumping on a city bus going through Kingston at 6:30 in the morning. I just would never do that to my kids, right? Like, I can't process putting my 12-year-old daughter, through that right now. She would just not have the knowledge or the street sense to be able to navigate some of that. I think back to that quite often, Dave, and I realized that there's a lot that I had to navigate at an early age, right? With a dad who was living in another country, a mom who would leave, at the crack of dawn and not be back home till later in the day. And I was navigating life, right?
Yeah.
At 11, 12, 13, getting myself up, fed, on a bus, going to school, navigating my way back home, and really being independent before being a teen, right? And I look at kind of how things evolved from there, and me making the decision at the end of a summer to not move back to Jamaica at 16 years old and navigate what I needed to do to get into college. And, as the path kind of evolved, it really does, the common theme is, it instilled that sense of independence at an early age. And I ended up doing a lot quite early.
So clearly that's not how it is these days in the United States, at least. Are there things that you're doing as a parent to try to help your kids gain a little more independence at an earlier age than maybe is the norm here?
There are, and maybe not to that extreme, but
Certainly.
with my daughter, she's very introverted, very smart, very competitive, but at probably 7 or 8, actually going back to pre-kindergarten, pre-K, we told her she had to buy her own backpack going into kindergarten. And so she had her first lemonade stand, which I don't know if it is.
I can see that. Yeah. So he's holding up, if you're listening, he's holding up a sign right here.
There's a sign that I'm sharing with Dave right now. It says lemonade 50 cents, cookies 25 cents. This was a sign we had made for her first lemonade sale. And, to purchase her backpack for kindergarten. And she got to 7 or 8. And a friend of mine who had on my podcast, she was putting together a kids' business fair here in our county. And she reached out and said, "Hey, do you think your daughter would want to take part in this business fair?" I said, "She wouldn't. Sign her up." And so part of the process with that, she had to apply. She had to give thought to the name of a business, what her product was going to be, how much money she's going to borrow from her parents to buy her inventory. And that freaked her out, Dave. She's like, "What if I don't sell enough products? I'm going to owe you money." I said, "Yes."
First of all, wait, I want to pause on that for a second, because just that awareness is amazing. That's not an awareness that most kids are. I mean, my daughter just did a business fair. She's 10. And I had to explain to her the concept of profit and loss and everything like that. So that's amazing. She understood that.
Yeah, I don't think my son would catch that either. But, for her, she ended up thinking through and started a business called Layla Rocks. Her name is Layla. She started a rock art business. And so we went to Home Depot and we purchased rocks and went through the process of creating rock art. She loves art. And she sold almost $110 worth of rocks on, a $40, $35, $40 investment for supplies, and had the concept of, a business ingrained at that stage. And the hardest part was for her on the day of the fair, right, to engage with people because she's so introverted and shy. And, that instilled some elements, a layer of, hey, you have to sell, you have to engage, you have to communicate. And I'm watching her at this stage she's still very shy, but that process is, she's developing in a way that I'm happy with right now.
I'm glad I asked you that question. That's such a great story. So let's return to your story for a moment. So you are working for your father in that restaurant, correct?
Yeah. I wouldn't even tell you I was gainfully employed. I mean, I was still in school at the time, but that was something that I was giving thought to. And it informed the direction I went in college, right? I was thinking, hey, one day I'm going to manage this business, so I'll study business management. It's probably the worst degree I could have pursued in college.
Really? Why is that? Why would you say that?
I came away from it not prepared to move back home just yet. And it was such a broad degree at the time that I found it really hard to place myself in a particular role or a particular industry. And what ended up, I came away from college probably having I kid you not, about a dozen jobs in the first 3 years out of school.
Okay.
I was just explore. And now today, I think it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. I did everything there was to do under the sun.
And you were forming opinions about what you wanted to do.
And that was it, Dave.
Yeah.
Because I get 3 months in and I'm like, hey, this is not it. And I would shift. And so I went selling life insurance door to door in Gulf Coast, Florida, to doing collections, to doing retail management, to, doing a dozen different things over a short period of time. Eventually settled in a mortgage industry in the early 2000s, doing the service side and then shifting to sales. Did that for a bit.
So the reason why I asked the question about the business degree is as I've done these interviews, and what I'm looking for are universal principles of success. So something that my kids can, or someone who's listening to it can apply no matter where they are. And one of the things that has stood out to me as I've done this interview is how often the person I'm interviewing, I mean, there might be one exception to this so far, how often they studied business in college. Even if it was a minor, even if it wasn't their primary thing, they took the time to study it. And what that did was it set them up for success in pretty much anything that they pursued.
Yeah, and I'm happy I studied business. I just think I would have, and looking back, it happened the way it happened, and it should have happened. But sometimes I'm curious how different things could have been if I focused in on finance or marketing.
Got it.
Against just straight management.
So it led you to the mortgage industry. How long did you work in that?
About 6 years.
Okay. And did you enjoy that?
I did.
Okay.
Up until things started to plateau and then go in the wrong direction.
Right. 2007 when we start to hit the recession.
Yeah.
So what is something that you gained from that time, or a lesson that you learned while in the mortgage industry?
So I had the benefit of a really amazing mentor. So I started out in service, and one day, Dave, I was looking out the window I was working with HSBC Bank doing servicing for them, and was able to rotate in different areas of that. One day I was looking out the window and I said, there are quite a number of really nice cars sitting in this parking lot, and there aren't that many execs that work in this building. What are they doing? And I had no knowledge of mortgage sales and started poking at, well, how do I get into that space? And there wasn't an opportunity at HSBC. And I started exploring, what mortgage companies could I potentially get into the sales side of this? I had sales experience, just not in mortgages. And had interviews with a couple of the companies, one of which where I ended up landing, there was a gentleman who interviewed me who said, look, I need to bring on a couple mentees who I'm going to teach you everything I know in a space of 6 months. And I'm going to give you, a certain amount of time to see if you can float on your own. And I took this gentleman up on his offer. And to this day, Jardinas is still a mentor, a close friend. But, he taught me. Right. He was a Mr. Miyagi who was like, hey, you're going to move away from this 9-to-5 mentality. Right. You're going to always be marketing. You're going to stand on relationships, and really taught me the power of, building relationships and working with people. And to this day, I would tell you that a lot of the things that he layered that had nothing to do with mortgages are what has proven, helped me most right now in my career with success.
Is one of the lessons that he taught you, is there one that stands out in your mind that you could share with others?
Again, coming back to it, it was really getting to understand people, right? And not just the transactional element. And I think it's proven true even more so today, where we work in this remote environment, where communication is transactional. I teach my team this every single day. I'm like, look, don't wait till you need something from Dave. Connect with Dave routinely and build a relationship. And when you need something from Dave, it won't be, this issue of Dave processing, hey, how do I fit this in? Like, build meaningful, lasting relationships that, even if I choose to leave this company, Dave and I will have a relationship and play the long game, right? And that was something he instilled in me at that time that, again, it's carried forward in how I've built a podcast, in my role today as a leader in, growing cybersecurity industry, right? It's those relationships that a lot of people discount. They think, oh, my knowledge should speak, my knowledge and my wisdom should speak for itself and should lead to my growth. And it's not the case.
No, it's honestly one of my frustrations with education in general right now is that there is not enough time put into the importance of just building relationships, as you put it, understanding people, right? Because it's so essential for our success, no matter what we're trying to pursue.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something you said. You mentioned that you noticed all of the nice cars were people in sales. How would you explain why salespeople are more profitable or are considered more valuable in the market? Because I think some people might not understand that. They'll just say, well, they're selling things so they make more money. But from a nuts and bolts standpoint, why do you believe that is? Why are salespeople highly valued in the market?
They bring the most important thing in the door, which is that revenue, right? I mean, it's a big risk. And depending on the model that you come into as a sales rep, right, you're betting on you in many ways.
Can you explain a little bit more what you mean by that? I believe you're talking about like commission versus base, that sort of thing.
A commission versus a base, right? You know, most of us as corporate employees, we are accustomed to having a base salary. And maybe there's bonus over and above that, but you're relying on a salary and your benefits. In the case of a sales rep, you're saying, hey, I'll bet on me and I'll take a larger share of my compensation in the form of a commission based on the sales that I bring into the business. And listen, there's the risk in that, right? I can think back to a couple years after I sold a business in 2012, 2013, and I want to share the story with you because it's that important.
Please do.
You know, the sting of not making that commission is real. In December of 2013, I had a then 2-year-old daughter and had sold a business, got back into the work world. And I didn't make that commission, Dave. I came up a sale short. And I as fresh as, you know, I could smell the air on that mid-December day, sitting in my truck, realizing, you know, I barely made enough to pay the mortgage for that month. I wouldn't be able to buy my wife a gift or my then, you know, 2-year-old daughter, right, a gift for Christmas. The sting of that was real. So that is the risk you take as a salesperson. And then there are days where it pays big, right? And there are many of those months where I did extremely well for myself in 2004, 2005, 2006, where a mid-20-year-old kid in Florida, I'm earning a really substantial 6-figure income as a sales rep that I wasn't, you know, in the service side of mortgages at the time, probably doing 40, 50 grand a year.
For those who don't understand sales very much or haven't spent much time in it, one of the big things, and you're kind of hinting at it with your story, is the sales cycle of how long it takes to move someone who's genuinely interested and then moving them from being genuinely interested into a customer. In the case of what you were doing, how long was that sales cycle for you?
So it wasn't as bad, right? You know, in mortgages, you could move somebody along through the process of a mortgage in the space of a couple months. So depending on the product, it informs that cycle that you mentioned. So somebody selling a car, that's immediate. Somebody selling a mortgage, right? That's going to be, you know, on the shortest end of that, probably 30, 45 days. You know, typically it's going to take a couple months to walk through the process of getting approved for a mortgage and getting all the paperwork and getting to a close. So depending on the product, right? And then today, you know, I'm working cybersecurity industry and, you know, we sell training, and that could be a longer sale that could take 3 to 6 months. So,
yeah. And then that's where it becomes so important for you to have the systems in place to maintain the contact. And that kind of goes back to the beginning of your story, which is in my coaching and consulting, if there are two job descriptions that are so most similar to each other, I would say it's entrepreneurs and sales executives. There's so much shared in common between the two groups. And I think it comes back to that risk and reward factor, right? Both groups
100%.
are willing to trust themselves to come up with a solution to the need to produce.
Yeah. And in the case of mortgages, there's so many elements that you're managing in that tight a window to be able to execute and close that sale. And a lot of it is outside of your control.
One more question about this time period, then we'll get into the next phase. You mentioned your 2-year-old at that time when you were in that story of how you didn't make the commission that month. What role has your family played in your success?
I can't emphasize just how much my wife and my children, they're everything. There's rarely ever a moment where I give a presentation, Dave, where the first slide of my PowerPoint is a picture of my wife and kids. They are the driver for everything that I do. And I often will start presentation off telling you who I am. I'm Kristen's husband and Layla and Nigel's dad. And what I do is different, right? So they are a big part of how I think, how I operate, and how I live out my legacy in the day-to-day activities.
You mentioned earlier in your story that your parents were separated. Does that have a role in how you try to maintain a relationship with your wife?
110%. In my role now as a father, I look at, my dad provided, right, what I term presents, gifts, provisions. Mm-hmm. But what I value even more is presents, my physical being in place, right, for my kids on a day-to-day basis, which unfortunately my dad wasn't able to. And so I value presents CE over presents TS, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. That's a beautiful phrase. People value the presents over presents. Yeah.
Yes.
I love that. And I've seen that so often in my coaching of entrepreneurs. There comes a point, I think, in many, not all, but many, where they realize that all they have been doing is providing, but not really being present with their family. And they want to change. They want to change the way they're doing things so that they can be more like that. But you clearly made that choice from the beginning. That's how you were going to build your career.
This past 3 years, Dave, has taken me through probably one of the most difficult valley seasons that I've been through to date. And I've been through several, more than I care to mention. But unfortunately, coming into 4 days before Christmas, December 2019, I woke up to a call that my dad had suffered a stroke in Jamaica. And just a week and a half before that, shared with my sponsor and mentor, I thought it was going to happen because he was burning himself to an end with his business. And I'd been pleading with him to wind it up. And I kind of saw the writing on the wall. And what I didn't realize, Dave, was how much that was going to take me out in the process. And by that, I went home to Jamaica immediately and navigated his hospital time and getting him stable at home and getting a caretaker there and beginning to look at what was going to be a very difficult wind up of a 37-year-old business in a third world country. And I returned home, Dave, to Maryland in mid-January, and my wife looked at me and said, "Hey, I got you 2 appointments in the next couple of days. Once to see your primary doctor and once to go talk to somebody."
Wow, that's insightful of her to do that.
Immediately I looked at her with fury and I said, "Woman, nothing's wrong with me." Very Black man, Caribbean man thing to say to my wife, right? I've had a million conversations with people about mental health and about therapy. When the light shone on me, I didn't want any part of it. She said, "Stephen, if you don't need it, you can always move past it." I bring this up because therapy saved my life. Therapy saved our marriage. Therapy saved this season as a parent, because what I didn't see coming was a pandemic a couple months right after,
Oh,
and
wow.
all that
Yeah.
that would entail, right? And through therapy, I was able to navigate a very, very challenging time and come out the other side stronger in so many ways. Right? Every other week, I jump on a Zoom call with a therapist and talk through what's happening. And it's no longer the vent sesh, right? And me bawling my eyes out. It's now, time for me to clear my head and organize my thoughts and be able to navigate some of the things that are happening and equip myself with the tools that I need as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as a husband and father, to be able to show up in the way I want to.
Thank you so much for being candid with that story. I think it's going to help a lot of people. And I 100% agree. Therapy has been a massive part of my life for many years. I talk publicly about the mental health struggles that I've had. And I completely agree. And what I love most, though, about that story is that you're still doing it. Right? A lot of people, when they have a crisis like that and they go see a therapist, the first question they're asking themselves is, how quickly can I get past this? How quickly can I stop working with a therapist? When the question you really want to be asking is this someone that I can work with long term? Because it's okay to keep looking for the right therapist. It sounds like maybe, are you still working with the same one, or have you evolved?
I'm working with the same one, and coming into it, I had friends say, well, Stephen, you need to find a Black therapist. You need to find a man. You need to find, and they had a list of all the things that I should find. And God said, that's not what you're going to have, right? You're going to have an older white lady from French Canada, a French Canadian woman, who, bless her heart, had a lot of the same things happening that I was experiencing and navigating, and we were able to create a connection, and we're still going to this day.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I've been through a few different therapists, but the one that I'm working with now, we've been together 8-9 years. So I feel like it's a process of finding the Dave whisperer or the Stephen whisperer. And it sounds like you were able to find that person. So thank you for the gift of sharing that.
And, by way of that, Dave, and the reason I bring this up, one, I am an advocate now, and I'm sharing my vulnerability in the hopes that other men will look to, especially men, will look to therapy. And I'm hoping to normalize that. But two, I can't tell you how incredibly successful life has been coming out the back end of that, right? In the space of 6 months, I saw 2 promotions in my corporate role, right? In leadership. I saw success in the things that I did beyond, my work life, right? I saw success in my marriage in this next chapter. And yesterday I shared a tweet, right? Parenting is the hardest job in the world with no prior work experience. Every single day, it's the next chapter of how you navigate that. But I am whole, and I'm able to show up in the different areas of my life because I am sound and I have the tools that I need to be able to do that.
What a great example. In my coaching work, I've found that your personal and your career are inseparably connected. If something is wrong in your personal life, it will reflect itself in your career. So going to work on yourself will influence everything that you do. So what a great example of that. All right, let's shift gears to your current project, which originally is Trailblazers FM, and now it's I Am Black Success. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's the same show. When I created Trailblazers at the time, living in Maryland, and still to this day, I'll turn on a news media, and I see people who look and sound like me on the news, and generally representation of successful Black professionals and leaders and entrepreneurs are athletes and musicians and people that you see on TV. And yet, looking around my community, I live in a very progressive neighborhood in the suburbs of Montgomery County, Maryland. I'm looking to the right and left of me in a daycare pickup, and I'm seeing, CEOs of companies and people at the highest level of their industry and occupations, and thought, hey, why aren't we talking about these folk? more,
Hmm.
right? I want my daughter as a young Black girl to grow up to see this. And so that was kind of the light bulb moment for me to say, I want to go out and start highlighting stories of everyday Black success. And at the time, Trailblazers came to mind. There was the Portland Trailblazers, the NBA basketball team.
Sure. That's a great word.
And so I thought, being the marketer, I'm looking at all the different handles and domain options, and .fm came up, and I was like, well, this is kind of radio 2.0, early stages of podcasting. And so I went with trailblazers.fm. Over the last 5-6 years, have 24 podcasts with Trailblazers in the name. And so as I was looking to reboot the show in this past year, I thought, let's take it a level deeper. And the name I Am Black Success came up. It was available. And thought, let's rebrand. Let's focus it. I think it's a term that highlights who we speak to and interview, but also what we aspire to be as Black professionals and leaders.
I love the connection that I just found with you right there, because it sounded like it was your daughter that inspired you to create this show. And for me, It was my children that inspired me to do it. I thought about, do I want to get more followers? Do I want to make more money? None of that inspired me. But then I thought, wait, I'm going to create a legacy for my kids that they can look back on. That's what you've done now, is interviewed hundreds of Black leaders that they can look back to and listen to throughout their life and say, wow, our dad created this for us.
And it's a beautiful thing. I thought I was going to be interviewing successful Black leaders, and it was going to be me serving my kids, and young kids coming out of college would be able to pull from this. What I quickly realized a couple of years in was it was other successful Black leaders and entrepreneurs who they didn't have community of other people close to them. And this was an amazing way for them to be able to look at what other people were doing and in parallel. And that community kind of took shape. So it's been a beautiful thing to kind of watch a community form. It's not a platform that I was looking at in mass, right? So we were connected through a mutual friend who I've been in a mastermind with for several years. I watched other people in my podcasting mastermind, grow 3, 4, 5x in terms of downloads in the same period of time. But what I realized was I was creating really deep, engaging community with a smaller focused base on Black leaders and entrepreneurs. So had I just said, hey, it's business, I'm not focused on just Black leaders and entrepreneurs, focused on all leaders and entrepreneurs, yes, I would have reached a lot more people in quantity. But by really getting focused and niching in, yes, there's a lot less downloads, but I saw more sponsorship opportunities, more connection and real engagement. And it spun up into other things that, with courseware that I've developed and other things that I've done, speaking opportunities. It created for a richer experience and a better outcomes for me all around.
Yeah, there's a powerful principle that you're explaining here, which is the importance of focusing on, I call it your most valuable customers. And equating customers with listeners on a podcast is a little weird, but really that's what you did, is you said, here is the profile of the kind of people that I am reaching with this. And you focus all of your marketing, all of your effort, all of your messaging around that group, and you make it easier to attract people to you because it's so specific.
100%. Don Miller says, if you confuse, you lose, right? And that messaging is so critical. If you're trying to serve everyone, you're serving no one in particular. You can't speak. I would never speak to my mother and my wife and my daughter in the same way, right? I wouldn't write a letter to all three that would look the exact same. Getting very clear on who you're wanting to connect with, who you're wanting to serve, allows you to get really clear on how you speak, how your tone, your messaging, down to your brand identity, all the other elements of how you show up will be impacted based on getting that clarity around who you most want to serve.
So true. So true. Okay. I want to ask you two questions. I'm asking the same question, but I'm going to ask you to respond in different ways. Part of the premise of this show is I'm looking for universal principles of success, meaning anyone, anywhere, regardless of their background, regardless of their gender, their age, they can apply these principles and they'll work. So my two-part question is, first of all, as you've interviewed these Black leaders, what are some universal principles of success that apply to anyone? And then what are some principles of success that seem uniquely suited to someone who is Black? So let's start with some principles of success that anyone listening to this, regardless of their race, would find useful.
Yeah. I teach this. I actually built this into the courseware that I've developed around personal branding, and I feel like it's so much more. But it has to do with getting really clear about your life's purpose and your vision. And when I look back across the folks that I've spoken to over the years, they're very clear about their why. They're very clear about, what their purpose and long-term vision. So a lot of times we tend to set these short-term goals, these New Year's resolutions, and when we don't hit them, we feel like we failed. When I've spoken to people who are tremendously successful, they have a longer view of what they're trying to get accomplished, and they understand why that is important. I often will tell people, I'll relate this, Dave, through the concept of Google Maps, right? When you understand where you're trying to get to, right? When you jump in Google Maps, you're going to type in an address, right? So I'm trying to drive from my house to yours. Now, I put that in and Google Maps is going to give me clear direction, right? And when I hit a detour that wasn't, Google didn't know that there was going to be an accident on I-95 on the path there, right? But I get caught up in an accident and Google's going to say, hey, I have another way for you to get to your intended destination. Do you want to accept this route? And it's going to take you longer, it's going to take you in a different path, but you're going to get to where you want to go. What I've realized is all too often, we don't have clarity on where we're trying to go. We don't know the destination. And so when we get caught up in our life's detours and we don't know where we're trying to go, we turn around and go back to where we started. We go back home. And so you see people who have lived their lives, you could go back. I can go back right now to people that were doing the same thing when I was 16 and moved to Miami. And they're doing the same thing today. I'm almost 46. Their life hasn't moved. They've just been going to a detour and going right back home. They have no clarity on where they're trying to drive their life. And that's the thing that I think, universally with the people who are tremendously successful, can't get that out, they have clarity around that long-term vision and they understand why it's important that they accept that route when the detour happens and keep moving towards that destination, even if it's going to take them longer.
Oh, that's
to get there.
So true. I have a book called The Result, and in it I call it the result formula. And it's systems plus accountability plus motivation equals the result. And it's a pattern that people follow. They don't realize that they're following it. And you just described motivation, right? Understanding clearly why we're doing something helps you achieve it. Before we go to the second part of that first question I asked, how do you see them getting that clarity? Because I think a lot of people listening to this understand intellectually what you just said, the value of it. But when we ask them to get clear, they're not sure of the path of how to get there. So what would you suggest is one way to get clear about your why?
So what I teach people is to reverse engineer the process, right? Like in 20 years from now, right? Jamaican guy wants to be sitting on a beach chair somewhere with a Jamaican red beer, right? A red stripe. in shorts and flip-flops year round, right? I don't want to be in Maryland digging snow. And, I often place myself on that beach chair with my red stripe in hand. And I think about, hey, what would I have wanted to accomplish when I'm out there 20, 30 years from now, right? Like, what would I have hoped to accomplish at highest level? Remove all the obstacles that are presently in your path, and then reverse engineer what this looks like, right? So what would you have to accomplish over the next 10 years? Good to great, Jim Collins, BHAGs. What are your big, hairy, audacious goals that you would want to target over the next 10 years that would help you kind of get out to that 20, 30-year vision in your mind? And then another book. So I just shared Jim Collins, Good to Great.
And we'll put these in the show notes, by the way, all these books.
And there's another one called Vivid Vision. It's by Cameron Herold. And what Cameron does, he helps you to get really clear now about what has to happen in the next 3 years, right? And so, what I'm doing is reverse engineering the process, right? Think about where you'd want to be in 30, 10, 3, right? You get down to your 3 year of a plan on what you're going to do in the next 3 years. Not just saying, hey, I want to own $1 million home. No, I want to own $1 million home on French Street in Bethesda, Maryland. I want, a white brick home with, a kitchen with quartz countertops, and it's going to be 5 bed. I mean, like vivid detail on where you're driving your life and trying to get to, right? And then, from there, Dave, what I've realized is you begin to task out the things that you need to get done. You're planning what has to happen. Those detours happen, that's fine, right? When my dad suffered a stroke and I put my podcast on pause for 8 months, I got 6 months out. I'm in the couch. I'm depressed. I'm eating ice cream and watching Netflix, and I'm lost. And guess what helped me get off the couch, Dave? Those goals.
Yep.
That vision, I was able to look up and say, hey, is this still what you're trying to do? Is this, and why, right? And this is why the why is important. And having clarity on paper, right? You got to get the paper out your head and down on paper so you can see where you're trying to go, right? That allowed me to keep the ball moving through those detours, right?
Yeah, I love everything that you just said and agree with it. And I would add, putting that vision onto paper is the first physical manifestation of the vision, right?
Yes.
It's the first thing where we're stopping thinking about something and we're actually applying action to it, and we're making it something physical in the world. I'm not saying that as like it's some sort of magical thing. I'm saying it's helping you as an individual move away from just thinking to doing.
Yeah, and the reason for that, you can't edit the idea when it's in your head. So you get it out your head and down on paper, and now you can begin to massage how that looks.
Yeah, or you can edit it, but it's just swirling around and it's
swirling
not
in there.
Yeah. Okay, so let's return back to that other question. And I'm particularly interested in this because it's not my experience. What is a principle of success that you think is especially important for someone who is Black?
The wealth gap.
Okay.
The wealth gap. There's a study. You can Google search the road to zero wealth. The road to zero wealth was a study published in September 2017. And back then it said, if nothing changes in the coming years, and a lot happened with the pandemic, if nothing changes, Black median household wealth is on track to trend to zero by the year 2053. So
what does that mean in a nuts and bolts sort of way?
In the context of, business and success, I fear that the minority population, because the Hispanic population is also trending to zero by 2073. And minorities are expected to be the majority of our population here in the US in about 20 years, right? So This is a big problem, right? If you have an entire demographic that has zero wealth.
Does that mean that the debt ratio is so high to the income that it's making the wealth zero?
My population is spending, they're not saving. And there's a lot of systemic issues that we could go back, longer than this episode, right? And talk about that are contributing factors to that. But at the core, I am doing a lot in the theming of content that I create to try and speak to how we approach and handle money, right? Not just earning a good living, but saving, clearing debt, reframing our mindset towards how we handle money and how we save money and how we invest our money and how we live out the legacy that we're hoping to leave, right? I often say your legacy are the seeds you plant in a garden you'll likely never see, right? What seeds can you be planting right now, especially for people in the Black community, right? Like, we need to reframe how we're approaching that, right? Instead of just saying, hey, you know what? I earn $250,000 a year in my house and I'm spending $300,000, right?
Right.
It's not healthy. Yeah, and that, unfortunately, the scenario, right? We're looking at the material things versus investing for the future.
So my perception is that that's a problem for a lot of people.
It is.
Do you feel that it is an even greater problem in Black communities? And is there an explanation for that? Is it a cultural thing or is it a systemic thing that creates that?
There is a cultural element to it. And I think, there's a much larger systemic issue around, how wealth was acquired, right? In the Black community. I mean, that could go back to a slavery conversation at that level, right?
Sure,
but there's systemic issues when you look at the way laws are structured, the way things have kind of played out in the last several decades, right? That weren't in the favor of the Black community. But looking at where we are right now, I can't control the things that have happened before, right? I'm not, with what I have, the resources I have, and kind of what's before me, I'm looking at ways that I can help bring knowledge and education to the Black community on, hey, it's great that we have advanced in terms of education, in terms of job opportunities, but how do we approach, handling our lifestyle and our spending habits, and our approach, again, to how we handle money day to day?
And I think this will be really helpful for people who are listening to understand what they can do. Let's bring it back to your family, which has been such an influence. What are you doing to teach your children to remove that wealth gap and actually have positive wealth? What's something that you've started teaching them as a parent that's helping setting them up for success with that?
Unfortunately, I hate to say it, they've seen it, right? They've seen it firsthand with my own dad's situation against their other grandparents' situation. And it's the tale of two tapes where they've seen the result of grandparents who saved for retirement and the one who didn't. And, again, coming back to wisdom beyond her years, then 11-year-old daughter looked at me one day and said, hey, watching me navigate the stresses of caretaking in our home with my dad here. My dad suffered his second stroke 10 feet from where I'm sitting and talking to you right now. Wow. And I strapped key lights to a desk and turned the second half of my office into studio so I could watch him. And, my daughter watched me in exhaustion, right, navigate a period of time, right, with caring for him through that season. And she said, hey, Dad, I hope you and Mom are not going to put me in this situation when I get older, right?
Oh,
she had to
How old?
wherewithal to,
How old is she?
at like 10, 11 years old, she was seeing this
goodness.
a couple years ago.
Wow, she
right?
really
So
is very
probably
mature.
11 years old, right? So, kids see, and they're going to learn more from what we do than what we say. But teaching them about, money is important. And we're keeping her abreast of how we handle money, how we approach saving money. We're blessed that, we're both gainfully employed and have the ability to send both her and her brother to a private school. But they're aware of, hey, this is the sacrifices we've made to allow us to be able to make those decisions.
Yeah.
And I think it's a certain measure of transparency to a level that you're comfortable with as a parent, but bringing them in where they can be aware and understand and appreciate money at that level. I don't think the way our economy is set up today, they're seeing cash. Like I saw cash at 12 years old where I was jumping on a bus and I was exchanging cash money at every single day. They're not doing that. They're going to be in a cashless society, right? Where they're not exchanging a $20 bill or dealing with coins on an everyday basis. They don't have the need to. But how can we help them to understand, debits and credits?
Yeah. I'll just briefly share one story from my family. One of the things that we've done with my kids, and I heard this somewhere along the line, someone suggested setting up jars. And we set up 4 jars. One was for fun. One was for savings. One was for service. So doing good things for people when they see they needed it. And then another one was for a particular goal, like college. And
I love this.
And we taught them to do it automatically from the very beginning, 7, 8 years old. And it was funny because I sat down with my son. He was applying. So he just got accepted to college. He's going to go to University of Utah. And we were looking at financial aid. And one of the questions was, how much money do you personally have, the teenager, have in your account? So I'm like, oh, let's pull it up. We looked it up. And he had several $1,000s in there. And he kind of stopped and he's like, I didn't realize I had that much money. And then he kind of paused again. He said, that's why you had us put the money in the jars, isn't it? So because that habit is there and he's used to saving far more than what he spends, that's just how he lives now. There's no question of whether or not that's going to happen.
I love that, Dave. I'm putting this on a sticky right now.
That's great. Well, and you mentioned the cashless. So over time, obviously, when they get older, we're not handing them out dollar bills, but we have an automatic withdrawal system set up with the bank account. So I mentioned how my son edits this podcast. We pay him, but that pay is also pegged to a certain amount must go into savings and all of that. So again, it just automatically withdraws when we pay him from the family business, goes in automatically to those accounts.
I love this.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. So what do you see? So you mentioned the vision. I'll ask you one more question about your career. What is your vision of where you're going to be 5 years from now?
Yeah, just another great one. There are a couple big things that I'm hoping to accomplish. One that I'm really being driven by on the personal branding side right now is helping more corporate professionals see the impact and the importance of building a personal brand in this time. And in the last couple of years, I've seen quite a number of people get laid off and furloughed from the pandemic, through to this time that we're in right now. There are a lot of people in tech that are getting laid off. Beginning of this year, I went through a process of hiring a new employee. And I probably went through 2 days of interviewing 5 or 6 people that were all laid off. And I wanted to hire every last one of them. And I realized that many of them, Dave, had been applying for jobs because they just needed it. They didn't have another source of income at all. So one of the things that I'm hoping to do is help us reframe as specifically for corporate professionals, looking through a lens of what's to come, because I feel like this is not going to be a season, right? Like employers, I don't see us living like our parents lived, working for one employer for, a very long stretch of time. And if you're wired, there's some people like me that have an entrepreneurial tilt, right? My employer is great with it. They realize that, what I do I'm able to bring to the work world. And I love being in corporate, have the benefit of insurance and benefits and all that. But instead of having this mindset as a corporate leader, a corporate professional of, hey, I'm going to look at stability being this one pot, this one source of income. I want us to start looking at how we brand ourselves, how we do all the things that we talked about through our conversation, getting clarity on our purpose and our vision, and beginning to look at inventory of the things, the skills and talents we have, and creating multiple streams of income. So, I have this visual of growing up in Jamaica, a one pot on our coal stove outside. That's how my dad would have ate day to day, right? Let's move away from the idea that we have to operate on a one pot on our coal stove, one corporate job, one source of income. Instead, we need to move to having a cooktop with 5 burners, right? And that one pot in the middle is your corporate income, right? Your corporate job. But you need to start creating other burners for yourself. And like Dave, provide a pathway that, God forbid, you should be laid off or furloughed or something else happens and you're not able to navigate the commitment to your corporate employer. You can turn on another burner. You can turn on your coaching business. You can turn on, some courseware or something else that provides a source of income. This is another way for you to be able to earn and get beyond, living that paycheck to paycheck, right? Where you have a little bit more income. So that's something that I'm really passionate about. I'm hoping that over this next 5-year period, I'm able to really make a dent with helping people in the corporate world begin to lay the foundation that allows them to have additional streams of income and have a presence that affords them a little bit more flexibility in what they're doing. So that's the impact I'm hoping to make on the world.
That's great. That's a wonderful thing to provide for people. It's wonderful guidance to provide for them. All right. So here is the point, Stephen, in the interview where I pause before we reach the end and talk to the audience for just a second and say, you've heard wonderful things from Stephen Hart, and you've heard an inspiring story and lots of things that he's accomplished. Now I would invite you to do one thing about it. So, Stephen, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share 3 actions that stood out to me during this, and then I'd like you to share one additional one that they might do. Any one of those 4 actions. So, the first one that I highlighted was where you talked about the importance of building relationships and how a lot of people discount the value of those relationships. So, one thing that you might do this week is think about someone who means something to you, and you've gotten to know them a little bit, and you would like that relationship to continue, and ask yourself, what's one thing I can do for them? Without any thought of anything in return, what's one way that I can serve them this week, and do it? And it doesn't have to be big. It can just be sending them a link of something that they're interested in, or it can be giving them a gift, but it doesn't have to be. Just giving them the gift of your time and your attention. The second thing, and boy, I'm glad you talked about this, is consider therapy. You said how therapy saved your life, how it saved your marriage, how it saved your career. It led to promotions, all of those things. So if you're listening to this, I don't care what is going on in your life. There doesn't have to be a major life event. You don't have to watch a loved one go through having a stroke like Stephen did with his father. If that happened, certainly that's going to be a catalyst, but no matter where you are right now, you can benefit from that kind of therapy. So I would consider reaching out and giving it a try, and give it a try for at least a couple of months. And from my experience, and as Stephen explained, it is one of the most beneficial things that you can do to change everything in your life. And then the last one was that conversation about vision, where he said, take the time to think about your vision and get really clear about your why and your life's purpose and vision. And I like the example of either actually sitting on the beach or imagining you're sitting on the beach and asking that question, where do I want to go? over the next period of time. I personally am a big fan of a 5-year vision. It's just far enough to push you out so that you can dream a little, but it's not so far away that it seems unrealistic. But whatever time period you want to do, sit down, take the time, write it out. Where do you want to be? All right, Stephen, what one possible action would you add to my list?
Yeah, is take the next imperfect step, right? When I went through what happened with my dad with a second stroke and he was here, I realized, Dave, I couldn't podcast anymore. And I just come back online. And I still wanted to have these conversations. And I said, I'm going to start doing live streams just so I could interview people like I did with my podcast, but I don't have the post work to do.
Oh.
And everything went wrong in real time across my social media feeds. And here's what I told myself. I'm going to be bad until things get good. I'm going to be okay being bad until things get good. I took the next imperfect action each and every day. And that's what I want to encourage. I want to implore each person listening to us in this episode to do, right? The result of that was 6 months later, I got a job promotion. And 6 months after that, I got another job promotion. Within a year of me doing that, LinkedIn saw what I was doing on LinkedIn every day, taking the next imperfect step. And they brought me into the first 100 people that they brought into LinkedIn Creator Accelerator program and gave me a grant for $20,000.
Wow.
Good things happened when I took the next imperfect step. So my action for you today is to make note of that. Commit to being bad until it gets good.
I love it. Commit to being bad until it gets good. Take the imperfect action. Don't let perfection get in the way of you just doing something that moves you forward.
Yes.
Perfect. Stephen, where would you like people to go to continue the connection with you? Because I'm sure a lot of people have heard this. They want to continue learning from you. Where's the best place for them to go?
So Stephen A. Hart is my handle and it's my website. So you can hop over to stephenahart.com and there you can access my podcast or my courseware or just connect with me. I'm most active on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. If you want to follow my journey with my crumb snatchers, you follow me on Instagram. If you want to have just, hear me voice my thoughts day to day, follow me on Twitter. And then, I share a lot of what I'm experiencing in my business journey on LinkedIn. But Stephen A. Hart, you'll find me everywhere.
Thank you so much for giving the gift of your time and your wisdom to us, Stephen. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave. This has been a great conversation. You're amazing at what you do, and I'm happy that you allowed me this time to share this conversation with you.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for listening in. And remember, it's not just about the knowledge you gained. It's about the action you take on that knowledge. So go do something. And as Stephen said, take that next imperfect action. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to the Dave Crenshaw Success Project, hosted by my dad, Dave Crenshaw, and produced by Invaluable Incorporated. Sound editing was done by my brother, Stratton Crenshaw. Research and assistant production by Victoria Bedez. Voiceover by me, Darcy Crenshaw. And the music is by Ryan Brady via Pond 5 licensing. Please subscribe to the Dave Crenshaw Success Project on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like to get your podcasts. And please don't forget to leave us a 5-star review.